The person looks around and realizes they are not alone, yet feels as if they are. Conversations exist, connections exist, laughter happens, and still something is missing when everything ends. Billy Graham observed this discomfort as a deep conflict of the modern human being, where the presence of many does not guarantee real connection with anyone. What begins here is not an analysis or a ready-made answer, but a direct reflection on having friends, having social interaction, and still carrying that uneasy feeling of being alone inside without knowing exactly what is wrong. At many moments in life, a person realizes they are surrounded by people, but that does not prevent a strange feeling of distance. There are messages on the phone, occasional invitations, frequent conversations. Even so, when the day ends, there remains a hard-to-explain sensation, as if something essential never happened in those interactions. This conflict is more common than one might think. It does not arise from a lack of people, but from the way relationships are lived. The person participates, responds, shows up, yet feels that they are rarely truly seen, not because others do not care, but because conversations often stay on the surface, confined to what feels safe to say. Many live with this without clearly noticing it. They attribute the discomfort to fatigue, a busy routine, a lack of time. They continue maintaining relationships, but feel that something in them never reaches a deeper level. There is company, but little genuine exchange. There is presence, but little emotional intimacy. This feeling goes unnoticed because it does not stop life from moving forward. The person remains socially active, attends gatherings, maintains connections. From the outside, there appears to be no loneliness. Inside, there is the impression that no one truly knows what they feel or think when they are alone with themselves. Over time, this creates a sense of displacement. Being with other people brings no rest. Being alone brings no relief either. A feeling emerges of not fully belonging anywhere, not because of explicit rejection, but because of the absence of genuine connection. The hardest part is recognizing this conflict, because it seems contradictory. How can someone feel lonely while having friends? How can this emptiness be explained when there is no lack of social contact? For this reason, many people keep this feeling in silence, believing they should not feel this way. This state becomes part of emotional routine. The person learns to live with it without questioning it much. They maintain relationships, fulfill social roles, but carry the feeling that something important is always missing. Many people experience this without clearly realizing it, believing it is simply part of adult life, when in fact it is an emotional wear that slowly builds. Billy Graham often looked at this form of loneliness with great attention to people's inner world. For him, it was not the absence of people that created this feeling, but the absence of connection with oneself. He observed that someone could be surrounded by voices, full schedules, and constant relationships, and still feel a void that was hard to name. In his observations, this type of loneliness emerged when social life became too functional. Conversations happened, meetings repeated themselves, but almost always revolved around what was expected, convenient or superficial. The person participated, laughed, responded, but felt that little of what they truly carried inside found space to exist in relationships. Billy Graham noticed that when this happens, the person begins to adapt. They learn to show only the parts of themselves that are well accepted. They keep doubts, insecurities, and deeper conflicts to themselves, not for lack of courage, but for lack of true listening. Over time, this adaptation creates an inner distance that is difficult to cross. For him, inner awareness played a central role in this process. When a person stops listening to themselves, they begin to seek in others something that should start within. Relationships become attempts at filling a void rather than spaces for exchange. The more this repeats, the more the feeling of loneliness grows, even with many people around. Billy Graham observed that this accompanied loneliness is rarely recognized as such. It disguises itself as normality. The person believes they are simply living life like everyone else. But inside, they feel they are not truly known, that there is a part of them that never enters the conversations. He also noted that the problem was not in the friends themselves, but in the difficulty of personal listening. When someone cannot recognize what they feel, they cannot share it clearly. Communication becomes limited, and bonds remain on the surface. For Billy Graham, this state was not a moral error or a flaw of character. It was a sign of inner disconnection, a gradual distancing between what a person lives externally and what they experience internally. Social life remained active, but inner life became increasingly isolated. His view did not point to quick solutions or abrupt changes. It was a patient observation of how a human being can feel alone, even while accompanied, when contact with one's own interior life is lost. Not as something to be fixed immediately, but as something to be perceived with greater honesty. In modern life, this kind of loneliness finds room to grow even amid constant interaction. There are groups, networks, endless messages, meetings scheduled in advance. The calendar may be full, but that does not guarantee real closeness. Many relationships exist, but few allow someone to be fully seen. The fast pace contributes to this. Conversations are quick, interrupted, divided by screens and other demands. People talk about work, commitments, daily events, but rarely enter more sensitive territory. Not from lack of interest, but from lack of emotional time. Everything needs to be functional, light, easy to consume. At work, this becomes even stronger. People spend hours together, share tasks, solve problems as a team, yet maintain a careful distance. There is coexistence, but little openness. Personal life stays outside. What one truly feels almost never enters the conversation. Even outside the professional environment, the same logic repeats itself. Social gatherings are scheduled, but often happen in a rush. There are laughs, comments, exchanges of information, but little deep listening. Each person arrives carrying their own fatigue and leaves carrying what did not fit into words. Social media amplifies this feeling. Never has it been so easy to follow the lives of so many people. Photos, opinions, daily updates create the impression of closeness. But this closeness is limited. It shows fragments, not whole experiences. And the more one sees the lives of others, the more the feeling of being disconnected from one's own grows. Over time, the person learns to adapt to this format. They show more acceptable versions of themselves. They avoid topics that might create discomfort. They keep conversations safe. This helps maintain connections, but weakens the feeling of being truly known. Coexistence continues, but loneliness remains. At night, when the movement slows, this perception can become clearer. The day was full of interactions, but something is missing, hard to name. It is not the absence of people, it is the absence of real exchange. The person realizes they spoke a lot, but said little of what truly mattered. Perhaps you have felt this before. Being in a conversation and still feeling distant, laughing along while sensing that no one noticed how you really were. These moments usually pass quickly, but they leave behind a trace of emotional exhaustion. Modern life values constant connection, but does not always favor depth. There is little space for pauses, for unhurried listening, for conversations that do not need to lead anywhere. And without this space, relationships continue to exist, but they do not sustain the human need to be seen and understood. This scenario does not create loneliness in an obvious way. It creates shallow coexistence that stretches on for years. The person does not isolate themselves, but also does not feel truly accompanied. They live among people, yet carry the impression of always being on their own when it comes to what they feel. Thus, the conflict remains, not as a visible drama, but as a continuous experience. The person stays socially active but emotionally distant. And the more this becomes normalized, the harder it is to realize that being surrounded by people is not the same as being truly accompanied. When the meetings end and the conversations stop, something changes. The person goes home after having talked, listened, laughed, and participated, but realizes that none of it truly remained. The environment grows quieter, and a feeling that is hard to ignore emerges, as if the presence of others never reached what truly needed to be touched. At that moment, there is no external conflict. No one is absent. And yet, the impression appears of being alone with what one feels. The person mentally revisits the interactions of the day and realizes that much was said, but little was truly shared. What mattered most was kept inside. This state usually arises when there is no one else around. Not as intense sadness, but as a light and persistent emptiness. A sense that despite so many relationships, There is no one who truly knows what is happening inside. There is no space where words do not need to be filtered or emotions adjusted. Nothing needs to be solved here. This moment does not ask for explanation or immediate change. It simply reveals the difference between coexistence and connection. It shows that it is possible to be surrounded by people and still feel that no one was truly present. This awareness lingers for a few moments and then blends back into routine. But while it lasts, it makes clear that loneliness does not always come from the absence of people, but from the absence of true encounter. When this feeling of accompanied loneliness extends over time, it begins to affect how the person perceives themselves. It does not happen dramatically. It is a slow, almost imperceptible process. Gradually, an impression forms that something is wrong within, even without being able to clearly identify what it is. Coexistence continues, but it starts to feel more tiring than it should. Being with people requires effort. Maintaining conversations demands energy, not because others are the problem, but because there is wear in being present without feeling truly seen. The person begins to feel strange for carrying this emptiness, even while having bonds. Over time, a tendency to close off slightly emerges, not as a conscious isolation, but as protection, speaking less about what one feels, avoiding deeper topics, keeping relationships functioning without exposing oneself too much. This preserves coexistence, but increases inner distance. This state also affects how the person deals with moments alone. The absence of company brings no relief, because the sense of having no one with whom to share what matters was already present before. Being alone only makes it more visible. There is a cumulative emotional impact in all of this. The person begins to doubt their own ability to connect. They question whether they are too demanding, too sensitive, too different. Not because of external criticism, but because they do not find a mirror in the relationships they maintain. Ignoring this feeling does not make it disappear. It adapts. It comes to coexist with routine, with meetings, with superficial conversations. Social life continues, but something inside remains waiting, as if always expecting a kind of encounter that never happens. Over time, this accompanied loneliness can weaken the sense of belonging. The person fê capa. Por que está pesando tanto? Título: Billy Graham sobre parecer forte o tempo todo. O cansaço que está te afundando cada dia mais. The person remains firm on the outside, but on the inside, everything feels too heavy, as if maintaining that posture is costing more energy than they can admit. Billy Graham observed this constant effort as a deep inner weariness, when someone feels the need to appear strong all the time, even while exhausted from sustaining that image. What begins here is not a warning or a path to follow, but a direct reflection on this weight that slowly grows, on the fatigue hidden behind apparent strength, and on how it gradually pulls someone down inside without almost anyone noticing. At some point, many people realize they are carrying more than they can sustain. It did not start suddenly. It accumulated little by little, day after day, while life continued as usual. The person keeps doing what needs to be done, keeps showing up, keeps being seen as strong, but the weight keeps increasing inside. This conflict is common, though rarely acknowledged. The idea of appearing strong blends with responsibility, maturity, and reliability. The person learns that they cannot show weakness, that they must endure, that they should not burden others with their own exhaustion. And so they keep holding everything together, even when it has become far too heavy. Many live this way without clearly realizing what is happening. They believe they are simply tired, going through a difficult phase, dealing with too many things at once. They do not see it as an emotional conflict, but as a normal part of life. Meanwhile, the effort to sustain this image of strength continues to drain their energy. This state goes unnoticed because it does not interrupt the routine. The person keeps working, caring, solving problems, supporting others. On the outside, everything seems in order. On the inside, there is a constant sense of overload. It is not a collapse, but a continuous, silent wear that keeps deepening. Over time, the weight begins to show in small signs: a lack of energy for simple things, irritability without a clear reason, difficulty resting even when there is time. The mind does not relax, the body does not let go, because there is always something being carried internally. The hardest part is that many people feel this without knowing where it comes from. They do not connect the exhaustion to the constant need to appear strong. They do not realize they are carrying expectations, roles, and responsibilities without space for relief. They simply keep moving forward, believing they must continue this way. This conflict becomes part of identity. The person sees themselves as someone who endures, who manages, who does not fall apart. And the more this image is reinforced, the harder it becomes to admit the weight it carries. The exhaustion accumulates but finds no place to be acknowledged. In this way, many people live sustaining a strength they no longer feel, carrying a weight that grows each day, without realizing that it is not life itself that has become heavy, but the constant demand not to show how much it is already costing them inside. Billy Graham paid special attention to people who seemed strong all the time, not those facing visible dramatic crises, but those who remained steady even when they were already too exhausted to keep sustaining that posture. To him, this kind of constant strength was not a sign of inner balance, but often an indication of deep weariness. In his observations, he noticed that many people confused strength with continuous endurance. They learned early on that they should not show fragility, that they needed to stay in control, that it was not safe to reveal when something felt too heavy. Over time, this posture stopped being a choice and became an automatic way of existing. Billy Graham understood that this permanent effort distanced a person from their own inner awareness. When someone is always busy appearing fine, their sentence, a loose perception, or simply a note that this theme touched you. Sometimes writing something simple is already a way to begin listening to yourself.